أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. In the name of Allah, the most compassionate, the most merciful. Verily, our praise is due to Allah. We praise Him, we seek His aid, and we ask for His forgiveness. We seek refuge in Allah from the evils of our own selves and from the evils of our own actions. And whomsoever Allah guides, none can misguide. And whomsoever Allah leaves astray, none can guide back to the correct path. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluhu, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. We testify there is no deity worthy of our worship except for Allah, who is alone with no partnership, and never has and never will be another. And we bear witness that Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, is the last and the final prophet of Allah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Brothers and sisters, friends and family, everybody tuning into the live stream and everybody joining us for the Zoom meeting. Thank you for joining us again for the Sunday discussion, continuation of the When the Moon Split by Safiur Rahman Mubarakpuri. Today we're going to be continuing into the chapter where it's going to begin regarding the Battle of Badr, very paramount point of the Muslim history, and a real showing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's grace towards the Muslim community, especially on such insurmountable odds, or a victory of such with such odds, inshallah. So we ended last week on page 149. So let's go ahead and begin from there. Bismillah. So the Battle of Badr. The military raids undertaken by the Muslims were minor until this point. They had been more exemplary than anything else, but they had served to initiate Muslims into the conduct of warfare. It was the Battle of Badr, however, that was a milestone for Islam as the first decisive battle between the Muslims and the Quraysh. The Prophet ﷺ rode to Dhul Ashira, attempting to intercept a trade caravan from Mecca to Syria. Again, these were the two caravans that come during wintertime and summertime. The caravan, however, managed to flee to Syria, and the Prophet ﷺ then dispatched 2 men to Hara in Syria to await the caravan's return. And when the scouts spotted the caravan approaching, they hurried back to Medina to inform the Prophet ﷺ. And once the Prophet ﷺ heard that the caravan was returning, he mustered between 313 to 317 men, 2 horses, and 70 camels. He then headed to Badr, about 155 kilometers southwest of Medina. The Prophet ﷺ awarded the white standard to Mus'ab bin Umayr, and the Muhajirin were given a separate standard was carried by Ali bin Talib, while the standard of the Ansar was borne by Sa'ad bin Muadda. So Badr, ringed by high mountains, was accessible through 3 routes. One was called Udwat al-Qaswa, which lays in the south. The second, Al-Udwat al-Dunya, approach from the north, and the third approach from the east, and was used by the people of Medina as the main thoroughfare to the settlement of Badr. And there were some horses, wells, and orchards in Badr, and for this reason, Meccan caravans headed for Syria, traveled along it, and generally broke their journey there, staying anywhere from a few hours to a few days. And it would have been simple all for the Prophet ﷺ and his men to seize the caravans by blockading all 3 escape routes. Success depended on the element of surprise, however, and the Muslims would have to appear only after the caravan pulled into Badr, seal off all 3 routes before the Quraysh could react. And accordingly, the Prophet ﷺ and his men had left Medina, heading in the opposite direction from Badr. So once the Prophet ﷺ was at a safe distance away from Medina, he changed routes and headed directly for Badr. The caravan that the Muslims hoped to seize was headed by Abu Sufyan bin Harb. It consisted of 40 men and 1,000 camels and goods worth about 50,000 dinars. And Abu Sufyan was highly cautious, and he asked every person he met about the movements of the Muslims. And he was at a great distance from Badr when he found out that a large band of Muslims had left Medina. Acting quickly, he turned the caravan westward and headed for the coast, bypassing Badr altogether. Moreover, he sent a messenger to Mecca requesting reinforcements. So when the Quraysh received Abu Sufyan's message, they quickly rounded up a squadron of 1,300 men to confront the Muslims and protect the caravan. And all the notable chiefs of Mecca, except for Abu Lahab, joined the force, as well as every available man from each of the neighboring tribes. And of the Meccan clans, only Banu Adi refused to take part. So when the pagan army reached Jufa, they received a message from Abu Sufyan informing them that the caravan was safe and that the army should return to Mecca. And the men were preparing to return when Abu Jahl arrogantly refused to retreat. And only the men from Banu Zahra returned on the advice of their chief, Aknas bin Sharik the Kafi, and the rest of the troops, now numbering 1,000, continued their journey. And upon reaching Udwa Qasmi, the Quraysh sent up their camp in a spacious field just behind the mountains that surrounded Badr. So the Prophet ﷺ learned that the Quraysh were approaching Badr, and he met with his men to discuss the options. Abu Bakr and Omar, anhum, both gave their opinions. Miqdad bin Amr voiced the prevailing sentiment. O Prophet, we will not say what the children of Israel said to Musa. You and your Lord go and fight, and we will sit here, as mentioned in Surah Ma'idah, the table spread, Surah 5, Ayat 24. We will fight along with you on your left and your right, and in front of you and behind you. Miqdad's words gladdened the Prophet ﷺ with their sincerity, for he had worried that the Ansar would fight in defense only if they were attacked in Medina. And after all, the second pledge of Aqaba did not call for the Ansar to fight along the Prophet ﷺ outside of the city. And the Prophet ﷺ then asked the men if they had all agreed. And Sa'ad bin Muadda, the chieftain of the Ansar, said in reply, O Prophet, I swear by the one who has sent you with the truth, that if you plunge into the sea, we will also plunge with you, and not a single man among us will lag behind. We will not hesitate if you dash against the enemies, for we will be firm in war and bold in the fray. Lead us, and may Allah bless us and our mission. And at this, the Prophet ﷺ had said that I bring you glad tidings from Allah. He has promised me either booty from the caravan or victory on the battlefield. And by Allah, there is a vision before me of a battlefield, and I see the exact places where each man will fall. And resolutely, the Prophet ﷺ led his men onward to Badr, and they arrived there the same night as the Quraysh. So the Muslims had set up the camp at Al-Qudwat al-Dunya, but Al-Hubab bin al-Mundhir advised the Prophet ﷺ that they should move ahead and encamp at the well nearest the enemy so that they could store water in the reservoirs. He also suggested that the rest of the wells be filled up so that the Quraysh would have no water, and the Prophet ﷺ took Hubab's brilliant advice and carried out his instruction. And the Muslims then made a small enclosure of palm branches in which the Prophet ﷺ would stay while directing his men during the battle, and the group of Ansar youths were put under the command of Sa'ad bin Muadda to act as lookouts. And after this, the Prophet ﷺ walked around Badr with his men, saying, this is the spot where so-and-so will fall in battle tomorrow, God willing. He passed the night in prayer and at the foot of a tree while a gentle rain fell and lulled the men into a refreshing sleep. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala recounts his favor to the believers in the following verse, Surah 8, ayat number 11. Remember how Allah enveloped you with drowsiness to make you feel safe. He caused rain to descend upon you from heaven so that you could clean yourselves. Rain that also removed Shaitan's influence, strengthened your hearts, and made you stand firm in battle. So the next morning, on Friday, Ramadan the 17th, the second day after the Hijrah, the two armies came face to face. O Allah, here come the Quraysh in their vanity and arrogance, the Prophet ﷺ supplicated. They deny you and call your Prophet a liar, O Allah. Fulfill your promise to me. Help us, Allah. And the Prophet ﷺ assembled his men and told them not to begin fighting until he ordered them to do so. Use arrows only when they come close, and don't draw your swords unless they are very near. And Abu Bakr then escorted the Prophet ﷺ to the small enclosure where the Prophet ﷺ began to pray to his Lord. Where he mentioned, O Allah, if this group is destroyed today, you will not be worshipped forever. O Allah, if it is your constant that after this day, you will not be worshipped forever. So Abu Jahl also prayed, O God, destroy today the party that seeks to break ties and believes in wrongdoing. O Allah, help the party today, which is much loved by you. So first and foremost, as was a custom of the pagan Arabs, there was a challenge of usually one or three of the mightiest of warriors. So the challenge to single combat began. So the Quraysh, three best horsemen, Utbah bin Rabi'ah, Shayba bin Rabi'ah, and Walid bin Utbah, stepped forward and challenged the Muslims first to single combat. In response to this, three members of the Ansar had come forward, but the challengers were thirsty for the blood of the Meccan exiles and said, "We want our cousins." And the Ansar then withdrew, and Ubaidah bin Harith, Hamza, and Ali came forward. Hamza faced Shayba, Ali stood before Walid, and Ubaidah accepted Utbah's challenge. So Hamza and Ali both killed their opponents with ease, but Ubaidah and Utbah had wounded one another, and neither had the upper hand. Ali and Hamza run to Ubaidah's aid and killed his opponent, and then brought Ubaidah, who had lost his leg, back to the ranks. Later, he died of his injury at Safraz on the way back to Medina. So then the Battle of Badr begins. The Quraysh, smarted at having lost three men before the battle had even begun, they charged at the Muslims who, encouraged by their early success, faced the onslaught without flinching. Proclaiming Allah's oneness, the Muslims cried out, "Ahad, Ahad, one, one." And the Prophet ﷺ, who is given an insight into the supernatural ally sent to him, turned to Abu Bakr and said, "Rejoice, O Abu Bakr, Allah's help has come." This is Jibril moving ahead with his horse's bridle in his hand. His garments are besmirched with dirt and dust. Allah's help came in the form of 1,000 angels. And the Prophet ﷺ then marched forward towards the fray, and at that moment the following verse was revealed. Surah 54, ayat 45. Soon will their multitude be put to flight, and they will show their backs. And the Prophet ﷺ took a handful of dust, and threw it at the Quraysh, saying, "Let their faces be disfigured." And the dust flew into their eyes and noses of the Quraysh, as mentioned in the following verse, Surah 8, ayat 17. "It was not you who threw, but Allah." And the Prophet ﷺ ordered his men to attack, crying out, "Rise!" The Muslims, outnumbered being 3 to 1, were inspired when they saw that the Prophet ﷺ himself was present amongst them and ready to fight. And supported by the invisible army of the angels, the Muslims swarmed over the Quraysh, and the Quraysh fell one after another, and soon they retreated in disarray. And the Muslims followed in pursuit, slaying some and capturing others. Shaitan, was also present in the guise of Suraka bin Malik bin Jashum, saw the army of angels and escaped by plunging into the Red Sea. So Abu Jahl is then killed. As befitting a general, Abu Jahl was well protected during the battle by men carrying swords and spears, and he was so well guarded that no Muslim could get near him. A young boy told Abdul Rahman bin Auf, "Show me Abu Jahl." And Abu Rahman replied, "What have you to do with him?" And he said, "I've been told that he vilifies the Prophet ﷺ. By the one in whose hand my life lies, I shall kill him when I see him, or shall be killed by him." So another young boy told Abdul Rahman the same thing, and suddenly Abdul Rahman spotted Abu Jahl on the battlefield and pointed him out to the two young boys. They attacked him fiercely with their swords, and Abu Jahl fell to the earth. And after the battle, they both presented themselves before the Prophet. Each claimed to have killed Abu Jahl. He looked at their swords, proclaimed, "Both of you have killed him." And the young boys were Muadda bin Afra and Muadda bin Amr. And the first is said to have been martyred in the same battle, but Muadda bin Amr remained alive till the Caliphate of Uthman, and the Prophet ﷺ gave him Abu Jahl's belongings. So Abdullah bin Mas'ud, who found Abu Jahl dying on the battlefield, placed his leg on his old enemy's neck and caught hold of his beard to behead him. "Hasn't Allah disgraced you enough, O enemy of Allah?" Even as he lay dying, Abu Jahl was unrepentant. "For what have I been disgraced? Is there anybody above the man you have killed? I only wish someone other than a farmer had killed me. Tell me who was victorious today." Allah and his messenger Abdullah had said, "O herdsman, you have mounted a very difficult place," Abu Jahl responded. And Abdullah then cut off his head and placed it before the Prophet. "Allah is the greatest, all praise is due to Allah." The Prophet ﷺ cried, "He has proven his promise to be true, helped his servants, and defeated the opposing army." And gazing at Abu Jahl's head before him, the Prophet ﷺ had said he was the pharaoh of this nation. So on this day of distinction, with Abu Jahl's death, the Quraysh were humbled. They scattered, defeated by an army of men and angels, and thus ended the battle of Badr. And it was fought not for territory, riches, or honor, but to make believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as victorious over unbelief. And the Muslims fought against their fathers, their uncles, their sons, their brothers, their cousins, and their friends. And Omar killed his maternal uncle, Asi bin Hisham, while Abu Bakr faced his son, Abdul Rahman, and the Prophet ﷺ's uncle, Abbas, was captured. And Utbah bin Rabia was one of the first three to challenge the Muslims in the preliminary duel and fought against his son, Abu Hudayfa, one of the Prophet ﷺ's closest companions. Blood ties were severed so that the belief would prevail over unbelief. And the day came to be called Yawm al-Furqan, the day of distinction, because on this day, the battle lines were drawn not according to tribe, but according to the belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And 14 Muslims were honored with martyrdom during the Battle of Badr, 6 Muhajirin and 8 Ansar, and they were buried at Badr, and their grave sites are still known today. On the pagan side, 70 men were slain, and an equal number taken captive, and most of the dead were tribal notables and chieftains, and in fact, the bodies of 24 pagan chieftains were thrown into a foul-smelling well. And the Prophet ﷺ and his men stayed in Badr for 3 days, and when he was about to begin the journey back to Medina, he stood over the well and called out to each chieftain by name. O son of so-and-so, do you wish you had obeyed Allah and his messenger? I have found that my Lord promised me to be true. Did you find your Lord's promise true? O Prophet ﷺ, Omar responded and asked, how can you talk to bodies which have no souls? And he said, they hear me just as they do, but they cannot answer. The Prophet ﷺ explained. Same case, so when we're being buried, we will hear the footsteps of those after being buried. So the news of Badr then reaches Mecca and Medina. So the pagans who then had escaped carried the news of their defeat back to Mecca, and the Meccans were crushed and disgraced. And unwilling to give the Muslims still in Mecca a chance to see them grieve, they prohibited mourning over the dead and captured. And refraining from mourning, however, would not be easy. For example, Aswad bin Muttalib lost 3 sons at Badr, and he desperately wanted to lament for his dead sons. And one night he heard a woman weeping uncontrollably, and he assumed that mourning had been permitted. He immediately sent a slave to find out if it was so, and he found that mourning was still banned, and the woman was crying for her lost camel. And when he learned this, he raged. She cries because her camel is lost, and restlessness has disrupted her sleep. Cry not over the camel, but over Badr, where fortune fell on an evil day. And the Prophet ﷺ sent 2 messengers to announce the victory to the people of Medina. Abdullah bin Rawaha went to the northern Medina, while Zayd bin Haritha went to southern Medina. And the people of Medina had been worried, especially since the Jews had spread rumors that the mighty Quraysh had overpowered the Muslims. And when the Prophet ﷺ's messengers arrived, the people shouted, Allahu Akbar, Allah is most great, and the Muslims were jubilant. Allah had given them victory, and they were serene in the belief that Allah would reward those Muslims who fell in battle. Let's finish these 2 sections here. So the return to Medina. So while the Muslims were headed back to Medina, the Prophet ﷺ received a revelation from Allah concerning the distribution of the spoils of war. 1/5 of the booty was set aside for the Prophet ﷺ, and the rest was to be distributed among those who fought in the battle. And he became the first prophet who was allowed to share in the spoils of war. If anybody is learned it in regards for the Old Testament, New Testament, the revelations of the old is that it used to be a burnt offering sent to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the first time in which this had changed. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had ordained that Nadir bin Harith be executed, and Ali beheaded him, and later the command to kill Utbah bin Abu Muayyat was given, and Asim bin Thabit Ansari beheaded him, but some sources indicate that it was Ali bin Abi Talib who slew him. And upon hearing the news of the great victory, many of the citizens from Medina traveled towards Badr in hopes of being the first to congratulate the Prophet ﷺ. They met the victorious Muslims in Ruha and accompanied them back to Medina. and the sight of the triumphant Muslims entered Medina with dozens of captives, led many people to become Muslims. So then the captives, after reaching Medina, the Prophet ﷺ held consultations regarding the prisoners of war. Abu Bakr said that they should have let the Quraysh buy their freedom, while Omar was in favor of executing them all. And the Prophet ﷺ decided to set them free in return for ransom, which ranged from 1,000 to 4,000 dinars. Those who could not pay and were illiterate were required to teach 10 Muslim children each by way of ransom, the ability to read and to write. And those unable to do so either were set free anyway. And the sidelight of this battle was the capture alhamdulillah, and subsequent ransom of Abdul As, the Prophet ﷺ's son-in-law. Zainab, the Prophet ﷺ's daughter, who was the wife of Abu As, was still in Mecca, and she sent a necklace to ransom her husband. And Prophet ﷺ recognized the necklace. He himself had given it to his daughter as a wedding gift, and his eyes filled with tears, and he sought the consent of his companions to free Abdul As without ransom. And the companions agreed, and Abdul As was freed on the condition that he would let Zainab migrate to Medina, and after he returned to Mecca, Zainab was allowed to join her father in Medina. And let's do this last section, and then we'll close for the discussion, inshallah. Ruqayya dies, and Uthman marries Kulthum. So when the Prophet ﷺ left for the Battle of Badr, his daughter Ruqayya was ill, and the Prophet ﷺ asked Uthman, her husband, to stay in Medina to attend to his sick wife. He would get the same reward. The Prophet ﷺ promised him an equal share of the booty as those who fought at Badr. And Usama bin Zayd was asked to stay in Medina for the same reason. Unfortunately, Ruqayya died before the Prophet ﷺ had returned, and Usama bin Zayd said, the news of the victory came to us after we had already buried Ruqayya. And later, the Prophet ﷺ gave his daughter Kulthum in marriage to the bereaved Uthman. Because he was married to two of the Prophet ﷺ's daughter in succession, Uthman came to be known as Dhul Nuriyan, one that has two lights. And Kulthum died while married to Uthman in the month of Shaban, the 9th year after the Hijrah, and was buried next to the Prophet ﷺ's mosque in the cemetery known as the Baqi, which once you make the trip, inshallah, for Hajj or for Umrah, inshallah, it's a relatively noticeable area, alhamdulillah. With that, we'll go ahead and close here on what page is this here? 159, inshallah. And we'll go ahead and pick up in the following week regarding the events after the Battle of Badr. Allahumma subhanahu wa bihamdi, ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.